Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Gleason here. We are moving into unit or week 3 today. So I just kind of wanted to post a video and just kind of give an overview of this week and kind of touch on some of the things that I would like us to think about as we go through this material. You'll notice that week 3 begins with discussion on the Enlightenment. This kind of the Enlightenment, or what we call the Age of Reason. We have this expanded scientific discovery, this move kind of away from religion towards rationality, scientific method, kind of the things that we think of as being secular today. And so this kind of brings up one of the biggest interpretive questions for American history, especially when it comes to the founding of the nation, right? A lot of people, there's this ongoing debate, and there always has been, over is America a Christian nation? If so, what does that mean? If not, what is it based on? And I really want us to, when we go through this material, I want us to think about how complicated that is, right? There's not a yes or no answer necessarily, but there is a kind of a nuanced position that we can come to, right? So you'll see that some of the figures that come up when we talk about the Enlightenment in America, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, like these are pretty big heavyweights when we think about the history of American thought and American politics, right? And so you're going to see how there's this interplay that happens, right? Jefferson, Franklin, people like them who helped found the nation, along with many other men. They are going to be very rationally driven. They're going to want to base their ideas off kind of this Lockean rational. Your text talks about John Locke, which you'll see this week. This kind of rational understanding about how people kind of are formed by the environment. They give consent to their government. If their government is not beneficial, then it can be rejected or overthrown. And this is going to be a big break from that kind of like centuries-long idea that kind of a government is divinely ordained and shouldn't be changed. So you're going to see this interplay, I think, and I think this is really important. You're also going to see a pushback. Your material this week is going to talk about the First Great Awakening and Whitefield and these preachers that begin to see this kind of secular slide that's happening in colonial society. And they're going to want to say that there needs to be a revival, right? This move back towards kind of a Christian understanding of things, right? So think about that interplay when you're going through the material this week, and note that America was a very diverse place in the colonial period. There were people that were very rationally driven, and there were people that were very religiously driven, and that's always been true throughout American history. And they have to come to some kind of way in which to make things work together, right? So when you're thinking about those things in the first 5 modules, think about kind of the rational Enlightenment influence of American society, and also think about the religious Great Awakening aspect of American society too. And then next, as we go through, in the in-between period, I want us to think about another thing which is very important, and that is the shortcomings of Enlightenment philosophy, or the shortcomings of religion as well. Both of these kind of aspects of American life fell short when it came to ensuring or producing equality for everyone. In theory, there were aspects of both. We know, when we see kind of the Lockean way of thinking about things, that, this kind of, that manifests into the Declaration of Independence, which we'll see, this all men are created equal. I think it's very important, if you look at when you click on the link to your Declaration of Independence this week, there's a little heading over it that it says right here, I have it in front of me. It says, most of the conflicts of American history from this point forward emerged from attempts to understand and implement what it means to believe that, quote, all men are created equal. And I think even with kind of a rudimentary understanding of American history, we can know that that's true. The history of slavery being the most glaring example So keep that in mind, and I really believe this true, whether we're talking about slavery, whether we're talking about the women's movement that will eventually turn into feminism and fight for gender equality, and then obviously closer here as we look around us, LGBT rights, all these different things that are happening, indigenous rights, Chicano rights, all of these kind of dissent that comes up is going to be tied back to this idea that the nation's founding was based on the principle that all men are created equal. But the very writers of those statements did not implement that, and to a large extent didn't believe it. So that's very important to kind of keep in mind. I want us to really think about that going forward, because we're going to see many examples of people trying to wrestle over what that means, or saying, well, this is the foundation of the nation, but this isn't being applied to me or applied to some subsets of the population. So keep that in mind. Lastly, I think I want us to think about the actual political aspects or political dimensions of the founding of the nation, or the us breaking away from England. And your text talks about the French and Indian War. So I want you to think about kind of this global dynamic that's going on, where these colonial powers that we've seen, the French, Portuguese, Spanish, all of these people, these Europeans that are trying to put their tentacles into the rest of the world, begin to clash with each other, right? And there's a number of reasons for that, but it's very economically driven. And they are wanting land, resources, trade, revenue, which your book will talk about, and this is going to pit them against each other. And this is going to come to a head in the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, which your material will talk about. And so I want you to think about the political dimensions. You're going to get to see George Washington as he begins to cut his teeth, becoming a leader, and some of his early failures before he becomes who he will be. So keep that in mind. And when you think about that, think about the reasons for the French and Indian War, but also think about what happens after, right? Although the English win, they're left with a huge debt, which they then pose on the colonial people. And when they do that, there's going to be a backlash, right? And there's going to be a backlash for a number of reasons. Number one, the colonists are not going to want to pay that, because many of them are poor. But second, there's a political, philosophical aspect to it, where they don't feel like they are being treated as English citizens, right? And so they're going to begin to agitate against this, first in protest, and then things eventually will come violent as we begin to move into the American Revolution. So keep those things in mind. I really want us to think about the complicated nature of the religiosity of the American people. I want us to think about how Enlightenment philosophy kind of presents this all men are created equal, and we all have these inalienable rights, but then it doesn't apply to everyone, specifically African slavery and indigenous populations. So think about that. Think about the role of religion, which will become extremely contentious as we go forward, specifically when it comes to the question over slavery, because just like Enlightenment thought tends to present all men are created equal, religious thought, to a large degree, Christian religious thought, which is what we're talking about here, is going to, on paper, say everyone is equal before God, but then it is also going to be used by slave owners to justify the slavery, and it's going to be used by more liberal Christian thinkers to say that slavery must be undone, right? So you're going to see this split on both sides, and this is going to cause a sort of culture war that will eventually end in the Civil War and push us later in the semester into the 20th century. All right, so think about those things as you're going through. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to email me. Make sure you do your quiz by Sunday night over this Unit 3. And then you may write this week on the Declaration of Independence if you would like. Remember that whatever you choose, if you haven't turned in an analysis paper, you have one more week, and so you can do next week if you want. But by the end of next week, there will be the first analysis paper due. All right? Thank you, and have a good week.